Howdy, James here, the Sega Holic, one half of the Sega Guys, and in this episode of the Sega Guys Race, we're going to take a look at 18-wheeler Pro American Trucker and ask if it's the strangest Dreamcast arcade port that you've ever seen. Now, if you don't mind, I'm a real professional, and I got a video to deliver on time.
18-wheeler!
Okay, enough of that. 18-wheeler came to arcades in late 1999 in the form of stand-up and deluxe cabs, both featuring a large trucker steering wheel to add to the authenticity. Developed by AM2 and running on the Sega Naomi arcade board, the Dreamcast version, released in mid-2001 in Europe and the US, is visually comparable to the coin-op version, which has come as no surprise, given other Naomi ports on the system such as Crazy Taxi, Virtua Tennis, Cosmic Smash and more. It looks great, vibrant and colourful, with the first-person view taking you inside the cab of your truck, complete with swinging air freshener and items on the dashboard, which slide from end to end as your rig takes corners. The third-person view gives you a semi-overhead view of your rig, and makes cornering that little bit easier, and also lets you get a better idea of what's up ahead. The premise of the game is remarkably simple. You choose a trucker, get assigned your cargo, and off you go, making your way from point A to point B on the map. Each of the 4 routes have their own unique hazards, from tornadoes to boulders rolling down the road, but the one constant is your rival, Lizard Tail, #1 trucker in the USA, and don't you forget it. Lizard Tail isn't so much of a threat, but more of a nuisance. He'll barge you, bump you, and verbally berate you, blaming you for getting in his way, receiving a ticket, and even traffic jams that you were nowhere near. Cross the finish line, reach the destination before Lizard Tail, and you're granted a bonus. However, failing to finish ahead of him doesn't impact progression to the next stage. He's simply part of a score attack mechanic buried inside 18-wheeler's makeup. The voice actor for Lizard Tail done a great job here. He's cheesy but amusing, although the Dreamcast port has had all the voice acting redone and is actually vastly superior to the arcade version. I mean, just listen to Lizard Tail in the arcade version.
I'm the Lizard Tail, the #1 trucker in the USA, and don't y'all forget it.
Wait, that voice sounds familiar. BD Joe, is that you?
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun!
During your journey, you'll notice vehicles with various time bonuses above them in green writing. Crash into them and the time will be added to your remaining seconds. However, it's more efficient to nudge them from the side rather than simply ram into them. Brute forcing these vans out the way more often than not results in you slowing down, hitting other vehicles and being caught by a Lizard Tail. Again, it's a nice little risk versus reward gameplay mechanic aimed at keeping you on the road that little bit longer. And trust me, you'll need it, because 18-wheeler, even in its easiest difficulty setting, is stingy with time. While the game is widely recognised as a Dreamcast title, it did make its way to the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo GameCube in 2002. However, the Dreamcast version remains the closest to the arcade, which you'd expect given Dreamcast's relation to the Naomi board. The Dreamcast version looks sharper and it's more vibrant, with the PS2 version looking darker and somewhat blurrier in places. 18-wheeler is a ton of fun. It's simple, has a deeper score attack mechanic than you think at first glance, but when you take a step back and look at the game, you can't help but think, why? Back in issue 67 of Edge, January 1999, there's an interview with Sega's then Consumer Division marketing manager, Kunihisa Ueno, during which he proclaimed, "From the very beginning we wanted a strong lineup. Saturn was known for having a lot of arcade ports. We wanted to avoid such a stigma for Dreamcast." So there we have it, a quote that we've mentioned on the pod from time to time when discussing the possible reasons for the lack of a Scud Race or Daytona USA port. Sega didn't want the Dreamcast to be another Saturn, a replication of the arcade in the home. You know, the very thing that makes a Sega console a Sega. And yet, here we are, months after the official discontinuation of the system, receiving a home port of an arcade game that no one asked for, and that, quite frankly, no one would have missed had it never made the journey from Naomi to GD-ROM. Say what you will about the Saturn, but the AM teams spoiled us with ports of almost every single coin-op you could imagine. Yet when Sega's hardcore following picked up a Dreamcast, the Model 3 ports were either subpar in the case of Sega Rally 2, or slim pickings with the likes of Fighting Vipers 2 and Virtual On Oratorio Tangram. Sure, Naomi ports were still plentiful with Crazy Taxi, Virtua Tennis and House of the Dead 2, but the big hitters from Model 3 were noticeable by their absence, and yet Sega decided to send the Dreamcast off into the sunset with an arcade port that involves delivering cargo from one end of the USA to the other. It could be argued that, by this point, Sega just didn't care. The original vision for the Dreamcast to remove the arcade stigma was bullishly made just a month after the system debuted in Japan, and we all know what transpired between then and March 2001. That said, I'm thankful for 18-Wheeler. It's a game which is quintessentially Sega, short and simple at a glance, but rewarding with extended play and score attack mechanics under the surface. And that's it for another episode of the Sega Guys Race. If you've made it to the end, as always guys, thank you for supporting what we do, and I do hope you've enjoyed this. Feel free to stick around the channel, check out the rest of our Sega content covering every Sega system and era, as well as interviews with execs from key periods in Sega's history. As for socials, you can find me on X at the Segaholic, you can find Dan at Swooper_D, and the pod account is of course at Sega Guys. Until next time, stay Sega, and we will see you on the Sega side. Sega!